Well, good afternoon, fellow constitutionalists, and welcome to the Wednesday edition of the Dan Clements Show, a Christian political talk show. I'm your host, Dan Clements, your constitutional warrior fighting for your right just to be an American. It is I went a month back, September 6th. I'll get it right sometime this month. In the year of our Lord 2017, remember, we're a hyphen-free, PC-free zone. God is still in control and He does love you. And I'm broadcasting live from the Hemlock Studios here in the beautiful, rain-soaked Central Susquehanna Valley in the great Keystone State. I have both chat rooms open. I put instructions in the chat rooms about things in there. Good morning, Dave. How you doing? I'm doing well today. A little tired from I did 2 days in a row of aqua therapy to get back on track for my Monday, Wednesday, and Friday because the YMCA was closed on Monday because of Labor Day. So I am exhausted today, pleasantly so, but I'm still exhausted for today. So hopefully everybody out there is that's listening is doing well, and I pray that God is blessing you. I want to thank everybody over Blog Talk Radio. My numbers are not through the roof, but I mean they're way up there. I'm still averaging well over 300. Some days I'm averaging over 500. Listeners and downloads and those folks. So I do appreciate you folks over Blog Talk Radio with your listening and downloading these episodes. I want to thank everybody over at YouTube. I'm slowly getting subscribers over YouTube. I am slowly getting things set up. I don't know how many emails and requests I have out for interviews. Some of these interviews I'm going to be doing because the time constraints will be done, be pre-recorded, but I will air them on the show, or depending on how long they are, hopefully they're going to be longer than 5 or 10 minutes, but depending on how long they are, I will air them on the show as part of the show, especially because we're going to be talking about relevant things. So I do have quite a few either emails or Facebook message requests or on-site, their websites. I go in there and ask for an interview there. Haven't heard anything back yet from some of these folks, but I'm hopeful. I really am hopeful. Thanks, Dave. That made me chuckle there. So now yesterday, I want to apologize for yesterday's YouTube video. I was unaware that when they updated OBS, Open Broadcast Studio, that when you play a video and you try to go back to the same spot, that they put time constraints on that I can't change. So if I leave that video for too long, it goes back to the beginning. So what I had to do, and it took me a little while to do it because I'm still not really good at video editing, although yesterday's session really got me, really made me better at actually taking clips out of video or splitting videos up. So I do have yesterday's video about Robert B. Reich and his ideas on the President Trump's tax plan and how he uses class warfare, covetousness, and envy to push his agenda. And I was watching some videos yesterday evening, and I was watching some more, listening to them while I was putting a few things together here on the show about Ben Shapiro. I like listening to Ben Shapiro. He's a very smart man. I know there's a lot of people out there, libertarians, don't like him, and I'm like, okay, because you don't agree with some of the things he says. I have too many libertarian folks that I follow that want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I don't agree with everything that Ben Shapiro says, especially when it comes to issues like Israel and war and stuff like that. But when it comes to the economy and law and stuff like that, he's brilliant. He really makes some good points. And I was listening to a video this morning where he was answering a question to a student at a college, and he asked the student, did a corporation ever steal anything from you? What did a corporation do to you? Do they steal from you on a regular basis? And if so, why haven't you taken them to court? Why haven't you gotten the law involved? And this idea, and we're going to go over this morning a little bit more. Like I said, I got all 7 of Robert B. Reich's points split up into videos, so it's easier for me to go back and forth on. But this was he's part of what's called the Indivisible group guide groups. Indivisible guide groups. And they put this video out on him, and he supports them. He's one of the founders of Indivisible Guide. And yet they claim this is a grassroots. Here's a Politico guy goes clear back to the Clinton presidency. Bill Clinton's labor secretary is who he was. He's not an economist. He's a labor law or labor lawyer. He's not an economist. And what he does here, and this is the same thing Indivisible group does, is they use class warfare. They use a lot of other type things. They use race, and they're race baiters, as it were, just like Jesse Jackson and Al Sharpton are. And they try to use race against people that they don't agree with. Oh, you're just a racist. Or they try to use some type of sexuality. Oh, if you agree with Donald Trump because of what he said years ago on a hot mic that he's apologized for, asked forgiveness for of his family, and hasn't done it since, as far as we know, you're going to still hold that against him. And because I agree with something that he does, even though I'm not a Trump supporter, then I must be a misogynist too. You know, that type of ideology that they use, and this is exactly the tactics that they use. They do not, their points are always cherry-picked. And it's always part of a narrative with an end conclusion that Donald Trump is no good for America and we're just going to work our tails off against him, you know, whether he is or not. And I think that remains to be seen whether the Trump presidency is going to be good for the country or not. I think economically, if he gets his tax cuts through, and this is why I think the Democrats and the anti-freedom groups out in the country are going to work so hard against his income tax, because history's, in my opinion, factual history is irrefutable. You know, part of what Robert B. Reich said in here about tax cuts is it's going to bring a deficit, is going to run budget deficits for 10 years, you know, $2.4 trillion. And that ignores history, and we'll get into that a little bit more here as we go through the show. The official drink of the Dan Clements Show is Rocky Mountain High Brand. Now, this is a small company. It's a startup company, and they put out 5 flavors right now. Black tea, and my wife loves the black tea. I tasted it. It's really, really good, but it's got caffeine in it, and I'm swearing off caffeine completely. They have a mango energy drink, a berry energy drink, and put your lime in the coconut drink. That's an energy drink. I actually drink the lemonade because it doesn't have any caffeine in it. 16-ounce can of carbonated lemonade and only 16 grams of sugar, 100 milligrams of hemp oil, and that seems to help with the muscle pain in my body, and it does. It really does help take the edge off of it. And that's what I'm drinking right now. They have energy shots. They have protein bars. They have a Eagle Spirit water. It's alkaline water. And so they have a whole product line. And just full disclosure, they're part of my retirement portfolio. So hopefully the company will take off, and I'll be able to have a few more dollars in my retirement fund. And maybe be able to retire early. Although I think my fibromyalgia is sort of, unless they can find a cure for it, or a combination of medicines that can make me more active, sort of sideline me for now. All right, today's daily Bible reading comes from the Gospel of John, chapter 14, verses 23 through 26. Jesus answered and said to them, "If anyone loves me, he will keep my word, and my Father will love him, and he will come to him and make our home with him. He who does not love me does not keep my words. And the word which you hear is not mine, but the Father's who sent me. These things I have spoken to you while being present with you, but the Helper, the Holy Spirit, whom the Father will send in my name, will teach you all things and bring to your remembrance all things that I have said to you." When Jesus was ascending back into heaven, or going to ascend very shortly here back into heaven, he wasn't going to leave the apostles and his disciples without a helper. And he was going to send the Holy Spirit, but the Holy Spirit couldn't come until Jesus left. And then the Holy Spirit was going to physically indwell the apostles and bring to their remembrance all the things that Jesus had taught them, and was going to help them, it's called inspiration, to be able to write the books that they wrote, the epistles and the gospels, and so on and so forth. So I just want to key on that point about the Holy Spirit being sent by the Father to teach them all things and bring to their remembrance all that he had said to them. Today's quote meal comes from Max Lucado. "If our greatest need had been information, God would have sent an educator. If our greatest need had been technology, God would have sent us a scientist. If our greatest need had been money, God would have sent us an economist. But since our greatest need was forgiveness, God sent us a Savior. God sent us a Savior. Real good article by Wes McAdams today at the Short Bible Lesson. And all these are over the show notes page. It'll be finished up right after the show. Does the Bible condone slavery? And there's a lot of humanist, new agey type folks that say absolutely yes it does, and it absolutely does not. And Wes McAdams goes through and he actually speaks about slavery in the Old Testament. He talks about slavery in the New Testament. So just because the Bible says something about slavery does not mean it condones it. Remember that. All right. Let's get through this. This is sort of like the second part, but I didn't name it a second part. I actually titled the show Indivisible Guide Groups Use Class Warfare to Lie to America. And this whole video, if you were watching it yesterday, this whole video that Robert B. Reich put out for Indivisible Guide groups to use on Facebook and put it all over social media is wrong from the get-go. He doesn't get a single one of his 7 points right. And the reason why he doesn't get them right is he's coming from a point of covetousness and envy. That's what he wants to instill in his followers, in those in Indivisible Guide, Common Cause, anybody that's in the anti-freedom groups out there that wants to fight against Trump, wants to fight against corporations for some reason, that never... Folks, if a corporation does me bad, I don't deal with them. I just don't. You know, a couple examples of my life. Back in Ironton, we had a really bad experience with Domino Pizza. Me and my wife both got sick, an hour after we ate Domino's Pizza. And I won't tell you all the gory details, but it wasn't fun and it wasn't pleasant tasting the pizza the second time. And for the longest time, we did not buy Domino's Pizza because a store put out a bad pizza. Bad toppings, whatever it was. We even called the manager the next day and told them that, and they were willing to make it right, but we're like, we're not even going to chance it. And it was years. We're talking maybe 10 years, and after we moved out to here before we started eating Domino's Pizza again. So, you know, the other, you heard me say this before, Chrysler and GM, they both took TARP money. They both took the money that Barack Obama offered, instead of going through a restructuring, I want to say foreclosure, but it ain't foreclosure. But anyway, before they went through bankruptcy, before they went through a restructuring bankruptcy, so the unions were very much against, in both Chrysler and GM, against them going through a restructuring, because they knew full well that because of their benefit structures, their wage structures and everything was costing, and pensions, was costing the company an arm and a leg. And if they went through restructuring, they would lose a lot of that through the courts. So they fought hard against it. So Chrysler and GM took the easy way out and took the money from the government, which I don't believe they had a right to do. I don't believe the government had a constitutional right to offer it to them or give it to them. And I don't think they should, as American companies, have taken that money. And so I've sworn off GM and Chrysler products. I've had the opportunity over the past years since that happened to buy a used Chevy pickup truck a couple different times that I really liked. I liked the Chevy Colorados because they're smaller but not too small, and they're a mid-sized pickup truck with 4 doors, and they're fairly comfortable. But because of the company that I would have to buy the parts off of, I just don't want to do it. And that's me. You know, you don't have to do the same thing, but that's me. I'm not going to deal with companies that do things wrong. I rarely buy any Pepsi products anymore at all. About the only thing I buy, and I don't even buy that anymore because it's got caffeine in it, would have been Diet Mountain Dew. And I was very sparingly in that because of what the Pepsi Corporation did to the Boy Scouts. They withdrew all their funding because of the Boy Scouts' then stand on gays and homosexuals. And so, you know, I decided I'm not going to support Pepsi anymore. And people do this all the time. I don't get into organized boycotts. I'll boycott you on my own. Whether it hurts the company or not is not, to me, it's immaterial. It's a character thing. With me, it's a character thing. So when this backlash on these anti-freedom groups against capitalism, against free markets, and against corporations is unfounded. As Robert B. Reich would say, it's nonsense. It's nonsense. And I said, I cannot believe, and I said this yesterday, the only way Robert could have got, or Mr. Reich could have got all 7 points wrong is because he's putting out propaganda. And again, he's using class warfare. He's talking about the haves and the have-nots. And as far as I'm concerned, I never had a rich person steal from me. I've had some issues collecting bills from some not rich people, but some people that thought they were rich. And it ended up costing them more in the end, court costs and everything to collect. It was a plumbing bill. I put a new well pump on for a lady who owned a bunch of properties. She was a lawyer, and she had and a real estate agent, and she had a bunch of rental properties. And I had to put a whole new pump, pipe, electrical wire. It took, we had to replace the adapter on the well casing, the pitless adapter it's called, because one part was aluminum, the other part was brass, and it fused together, and we took a backhoe to pull the pipe up out of the well to get that broke free. And the bill was somewhere upwards of close to $1,500 by the time we were done, and it took me a year to get that money out of her. But she was being ignorant. I never had a problem with any corporations I've dealt with. Whether it was plumbing supplies like Hajoka, used to deal with Hajoka a lot, American Standard, never had a problem with any of the hardware stores, anything. They never ripped me off, and if something was defective, I never had a problem taking it back and getting my money out. And if I did, I wouldn't deal with them. If they gave me a hard time, I wouldn't deal with them. And so this idea that corporate America is out to get everybody is one of these narratives that are put out, and people don't fact check this. They don't think about, well, in my life, they haven't done anything wrong to me, and then they get into the aboutisms. What aboutisms? Well, I heard this person did, or I heard that person did, or I heard this story told on a YouTube video that was shared with me by a friend that this person, something happened with them in a corporation. Enron's a perfect example, and people were being warned. This is a funny thing. They were interviewing folks with Enron, and almost all, not quite all, but the vast majority of the employees of Enron had their 401ks invested 100% in Enron. And then when they went belly up, they were, and Enron was one of these Ponzi schemes that were out there. And they interviewed people, and they said, well, didn't anybody tell you need to diversify your portfolio? Yeah, they did, but Enron was doing so well that I just couldn't go wrong. But they're sitting there with nothing in their retirement account now. And here's an example of a bad corporation, which Enron's no longer in business. They're gone. So the free markets actually take care of that kind of stuff. I mean, they were gone before the federal government could step in and do anything with them. I mean, they were out of business and the whole 9 yards when that house of cards came down. So my point in saying all this is you have this narrative that's being built out there among the anti-freedom groups, and it's a false narrative because they cherry pick facts, or they want to pit, and in this instance, they want to pit average Americans against corporations. And the corporations that Robert B. Reich is talking about, the large profitable corporations, out of the percentage that they make up of all American corporations is only 19.5%. So these taxes would affect, 80.5% of the corporations in America that aren't profitable, that either they had a loss in the past 5 years and they're amortizing that loss out, or they had a bad year, whatever the case may be. But we're talking about the vast majority of corporations this would help. But that's not what Robert B. Reich is talking about. He's talking about large profitable corporations in these videos. And we got up to like number 4 yesterday, and I hurriedly went through the rest of them. But I want to just briefly recap the first 3 points, and then we'll get into the 4th point. I'll go through them a little bit quicker because I'm just going to tell you over on the show notes page, yesterday and today, episode 878 and yesterday 877 are all the notes in there of the different things I'm going to talk about here. So let me get my fair use up there again, because these people sometimes can be nutso.
Donald Trump wants to cut the corporate income tax rate from 35% to 15% in order to, in his words, make the United States more competitive, unquote. This is nonsense for 7 reasons. First, profitable U.S. corporations already pay an average of only 14%, according to the Government Accountability Office. That's less than a lot of middle-class families pay. And that's less than half the official 35% corporate tax rate. What's more, some giant corporations pay little, if any, U.S. taxes because of loopholes or because they shift their profits offshore to tax havens.
Now, the one thing I want to say about the tax havens, the loopholes, one, the loopholes are put in there by Congress. And I agree that there's a lot of lobbyists that are going on and a lot of lobbying that is going on with this. But the tax havens are a direct cause, it's a causal effect of the high taxes. If they can shelter some of their money in these tax havens, they'll have more to invest on down the road. Matter of fact, their money's just not sitting in these tax havens kicking back and, having a margarita and whooping it up, That money's in these tax havens and is being invested, is being put to work, but the capital gains they get off that money from the tax haven is exempt from American taxes. And so, and it's not just corporations that do this. There are well-to-do folks that make less than or right around $100,000 or less. I was doing some more reading about this. There's a lot of people that are upper middle class that actually shift some of their money in these tax havens. Is he going to go after them too? And so the corporation's taking advantage of what's legally on the books that Congress has put on the books. There's nothing wrong with that. And again, he uses the profitable large corporations that only make up 19.5%. 19.5% of all the corporations in America. And then, so you got 80.5% of American corporations that do business in the United States that are either large or just all others. And this tax cut would greatly benefit them, especially the small corporations like the small S corporations or the LLCs, where they have to report things like personal income. So if Donald Trump lowers the rate to 15%, these folks are in that, and plus I have an article here about freelancers. 15% tax on freelance income would be huge, as Donald Trump would say. This is by Peter St. Ongi over at Foundation for Economic Education. He posted this April 27th of this year, 2017. And this would mean that there's a lot of freelancers out there that make a really good living, but because they're single persons, they don't feel like a corporation would be best for them. They have to report all that income on as personal income, which puts them in a higher tax bracket. And if this were the case, and we'll get into point 4 and talk about this a little more, but if this was the case, they could have actually a lower tax burden. So right off the bat, point number 1, we see the class warfare. We see the cherry picking of facts. If you go look at the GAO, the Government Accountability Office report on this, on average, after the loopholes and everything, if you take all the corporations together, they pay a rate about 22 to 29%. Still not the 35%, but they are taking advantage of deductions and loopholes that are actually written into the tax law. That's why a simple flat tax would be the best. You don't have loopholes, get rid of all the loopholes, and anything under a certain income amount you don't pay any taxes on. And then anything over that, like your first $26,000 or $30,000, you don't pay any taxes on that. And then over the top of that, you pay 10 or 15% tax. I say 10. There's some people say it should be 17 to 20 because we've got to fund the government. And again, this idea that Robert Reich puts out about these tax cuts not feeding into the Treasury is another misnomer. And so here's.
Second, Trump's corporate tax cut will bust the federal budget. The Nonpartisan Tax Policy Center projects it will reduce federal revenues by $2.4 trillion. That's trillion dollars over 10 years. This will either require huge cuts in services for all of us or additional taxes paid by us to pick up the corporate tab.
Now, point two here, we talked about this a little bit yesterday, totally ignores history. And we got to go back to Ronald Reagan and his tax cuts that were phased in over 3 years. After the third year, tax revenues to the Treasury increased. They didn't decrease. They totally increased. And this is the gimmick that these folks that use class warfare use. Everything's static to them. There's no such thing as dynamic. Everything's static. If you take this, if you cut the taxes from this to this is how much you're going to lose to the Treasury over the next 10 years, $2.4 trillion. And that's it. And they don't realize you cut the corporate rate down to 15%. How much offshore money is going to come flooding back into the country to invest in businesses, buying businesses, hiring more employees to do more work, getting more businesses, being more profitable. Everything to these government types, these politicos, everything's static. But history is against them. Again, go back and do some research on Ronald Reagan and tax revenues during the Reagan boom, and also Kennedy, and also when George W. Bush, when he had cut the tax rate, not as much as Reagan, but there was a windfall to the U.S. Treasury. So there again, history is not on his side, and this is what happens when you cherry pick your facts and people actually go back and do some research and actually get into them. All right, point number 3 here.
Number 3, the White House says the tax cuts will create a jump in economic growth that will generate enough new revenue to wipe out any increase in the budget deficit. This is supply-side trickle-down nonsense. Ronald Reagan and George W. Bush both cut taxes mostly for the rich, and both ended their presidencies with huge budget deficits.
All right. He was comparing apples to oranges here. He was comparing apples to oranges there, folks. He was talking about supply-side economics, which does work. Folks back in the politicos back in Reagan's time called it voodoo economics, and yet the numbers didn't lie. There was job growth. The unemployment rate plummeted. It went from around 9.7 when Jimmy Carter left office, and you heard me talk about this before. They used the U3 number instead of the U6 number, but we won't get into that there. We'll just use numbers on the reports, and it dropped down well below 5%. Towards the end of Ronald Reagan's presidency. If that's not job growth, I don't know what it is. I have no clue what it is if that is not job growth. And the problem with him equating the budget deficits with job growth, I got to scratch my head. They're two, like I said, he's comparing apples to oranges. We absolutely had a job boom in the United States. It set up, actually, all this job creation set up the tech boom and the housing boom, the whole 9 yards. And so the numbers don't lie. Again, unemployment from 9.7 down to 4.5 or 6 at the end of his term. That's job growth, folks. That's actual job growth. Okay, his next point. That's where we sort of left off yesterday. So his next point.
Fourth, Trump's plan will create a new special loophole that allows hedge fund managers, big law firms, and real estate moguls like Donald Trump to slash the pass-through tax rate they pay on their business income, dropping it from 40% to 15%. 15% is what a middle-class person pays. Do you think people like Donald Trump should pay a tax rate that someone making $60,000 a year pays?
Again, there he brings up that idea of tax envy, that he brings that up. You know, the class warfare. Do you think it's fair? Do you think it's fair that Donald Trump pays $150 million, that's 15% of whatever, you know, and I'm just using an example, compared to somebody who's making $100,000 who pays $15,000 in taxes? Is that fair? I mean, the dollars are, if they quit using percentages and go just with the dollars that they have to actually pay, that they do physically pay into the Treasury, you would see a huge disparity. But the problem is, again, he's picking on large, profitable corporations and hedge fund managers. And yes, it would benefit them, but guess who else it also benefits? All the other corporations. And this let me read this real quick, because I didn't get to this very much yesterday. This is by Peter Ongi over at FEE.org. A 15% tax on freelance income would be huge. President Trump finally came up with this tax plan. Overall, it's a solid plan, though it was pretty much what we expected given the market responses. You could effectively lop the top rate from 39.6 down to 15% in one go. The new rates themselves were pretty standard. Trump wants three brackets topping out at 35%, sweetened with the doubling of the standard deduction to $12,600 per taxpayer. Decent, but how about what you'd expect, say, from Bush? After that, it gets more interesting. Trump proposes repealing several nasty taxes, including the alternative minimum tax, the estate tax, or the death tax as we know it, and the Obamacare 3.8% investment tax. Finally, and most important, he wants to cut business tax to 15% and has argued for that rate to apply to small businesses, including freelancers. This is potentially game-changing, since millions of high earners could simply recategorize their earnings as business income. You could effectively lop the top from 39.6% to 15% in one go. If that happens, the cuts could be Reagan-esque in impact. In other words, there are YouTubers out there that are making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. And if they're not organized as a business, then they have to pay the top personal tax rate. And what this means is, right now it's kind of a wash, but what this means is, let's say a YouTuber like me, and I'm nowhere close to this, let's say I would start making a couple $100,000 a year. I would reorganize myself and become a corporation and take advantage of the 15% tax of a business over the 35% at the top rate for personal income. But see, Robert Reich doesn't tell you that. All he's doing is trying to use class warfare to try to brainwash and indoctrinate his followers. And with me, it's not going to wash. And the problem with doing what he's doing is that it does not take into account the truth of the matter. He cherry picks the facts he wants, and he tries to make the corporations out to be big bad people out there that do nothing good for the country. And the problem is, if you really rationally think about it, without the free markets and without corporations and the taxes they pay and the income taxes we pay, and basically free market capitalism has created this wealth that they can tax, they wouldn't have the money in the form of taxation to do all the socialistic work they're doing. See, if you try to start a country off with socialistic values from the get-go, it never gets off the ground. Never would. Because it goes against the laws of economics. And there are laws of economics out there. Okay, his fifth point, race to the bottom. I love this one. This one is one of his more stupid points. And this is because socialists, those that covet and envy other people and use class warfare, they don't believe in competition. Oh, competition creates unequal outcomes. No kidding. There's winners and there's losers. Oh, man. What a concept. What a concept to have winners and losers. And the thing is, if we don't have any winners, who are we going to model our lives after, economically speaking? If we don't have any winners, if everybody's a loser, why would I want to emulate a loser? I'll just be a loser like them. Equality of outcome. Oh, that burns me up. That is totally Marxist, communist think there. Okay, let's get to his fifth point here.
Fifth, the plan also creates an international race to the bottom on corporate tax rates that the United States cannot possibly win. One of its supposed attractions is it makes U.S. corporation taxes more competitive internationally, but we can't match the rates in tax havens, which are often zero. And other countries will just lower their taxes in response. That's what happened after 1986, the last time the United States cut corporate tax rates.
All right. Again, whether he likes it or not, the rest of the world is heading competition-wise a race to the bottom to see who can have the lowest corporate tax rates, the tax havens, the whole nine yards. And why can't we compete with tax havens? What would happen if corporations paid nothing in corporate tax? What happens if we went to a zero corporate tax? The federal corporate tax is not the only tax that the corporations pay. They pay property tax. They pay employment taxes. There's all sorts of things that they have to pay as far as taxes, utilities. They pay salaries of their employees. And this comes to the next point that we're going to get into, that he makes no sense whatsoever about corporations not reinvesting in themselves. That's hogwash. That's nonsense, as he would say. He has, for a guy that's supposed to be a lawyer and a Rhodes Scholar, I think he wasted his money on his education. Maybe I'm being a little too harsh there, but he just does not seem like he's researched this well. And again, like I said yesterday, the only way you can get all these points wrong is if you're trying to get them wrong and you're propagandizing the issue here. But this idea of, oh, this is going to be bad for the world if we have these tax rates going to, heading to the bottom. We have this competition to see who's going to have the lowest corporate tax rate in the world. And we can't compete with these tax havens. What would happen? What would happen if the United States became a tax haven and other foreign countries started investing their money in our tax havens that we have here instead of down to Cayman Islands or the Virgin Islands? He never thinks about that either. And I'm probably not thinking about everything because I'm not a trained economist. I did stay at a Holiday Inn Express last night, but anyway, Dave, I hope you got that joke. So his next point is just as ridiculous as the next ones. Talking about they don't need it because they're profitable, and they have to pay their fair share. And again, fair is so subjective. It just nauseates me how these people frame these arguments. And then you ask them, what is the fair share? What's the fair share that the government gets to take? What's fair? Should it be 90%? Anybody makes over a certain amount of money, or should it be as low as we can so the money can keep circulating throughout the economy and investing and growing and stuff like that? So hang on just a second here, folks.
Fifth, the plan also creates an international race to the bottom on corporate tax rates that the United States cannot possibly win. One of its supposed attractions is it makes U.S. corporation taxes more competitive internationally, but we can't match the rates in tax havens, which are often zero. And other countries will just lower their taxes in response. That's what happened after 1986, the last time the United States cut corporate tax rates. Number 6, American corporations don't need a tax cut. They're already hugely competitive, as measured by their profits, which are near record highs, while the share of taxes they pay are at record lows. Corporations should be doing more to pay their fair share, not getting a giant tax cut.
And this is another fallacy. And this hasn't changed. I was checking this a couple months ago, and this hasn't changed since I first seen it on the Rush Limbaugh show, where he had a pie chart down there that the top 10% wage earners in the United States, that includes individuals and corporations, pay over 50% of the taxes. And I think if you take it up to, I think, the top 20 or 25% of top wage earners in America, they pay 90% of the taxes. So again, here's another fallacy that he puts on there. That, oh, they're not paying their fair share. They're actually carrying the load. But it's not enough for them. It's not enough for these anti-freedom folks that hate corporations for no good reason. Now, are there bad corporations out there? Yes, I've said that a lot. There are bad corporations out there, and the free markets take care of bad corporations. These people don't think so. They think they need government regulations, but the free market has always taken care of bad players. It's called competition. Somebody else is going to do the job better and cheaper and put this other company out of business if they don't change their ways. If they don't change their ways. Now, the last point, 7 point, I'm sorry, I got added 5 back in there again. I hit the wrong button there, so I just let it play. The last point, number 7, to me is the funniest. And I'll tell you why after we play it here.
Number 7, the White House says corporations will use the extra profits they get from the tax cut to invest in more capacity and jobs. Rubbish. Corporations are now using a large portion of their profits to pay their CEOs hefty pay packages and to buy other companies in order to raise their stock prices. There's no reason to suppose they'll do any different, even with more profits. So don't fall for Trump's corporate tax plan. It will be a huge windfall for corporations and billionaires, like many of Trump's own cabinet members, family members, and likely even Trump himself. Though because he won't release his taxes, we can't tell how much he'll enrich himself from his own tax plan. But we do know who will lose out: the rest of us.
All right, folks, that was the last one. And this one, it's so stupid, it's funny. It really is. Real world example. I talked about it yesterday, I'll say it again today. I was working for Mohawk Flush Doors, who used to be family owned. They sold to a corporation called Masonite. Masonite, I haven't been by there lately, but they were supposed to break ground on an addition to the warehouse at the plant over in Point Township in Northumberland, PA, at Mohawk Flush Doors. And if Robert B. Reich was correct, why would they expand that plant? Which means they're expanding a plant. They're going to be hiring more people. They want to put a third full shift onto the place. They did get rid of a smaller operation out in Wisconsin that only employed 15 or 20 employees, but the facility was so old and the equipment was so old and the location was so bad that they ended up folding up that operation and sending their work to us. Most of it. Some of it went to another plant in Wisconsin, but we got the bulk of their work, and we had to they were having to set up new lines. They're hiring more folks. This is what corporations do. Corporations have a fiduciary responsibility to make a profit. And sometimes making a profit means you have to expand your business. They have a worldwide business. They own a lot of their own companies that supply the door skins and the wood stiles and stuff like that to make the doors, which is a smart move because then they own the supply of their materials, so they don't have that markup, that middleman markup there. And they make good quality architectural doors. But they're expanding. I mean, when I worked there before as a family business, there was like just around 100, maybe 100 people that worked there, if that. I think it was closer to 75. And when I was working there with the 2 shifts, actually I had 3 shifts, but the third shift wasn't a full shift, something like 250 people worked there. Again, because they were bought out and money was invested, business is growing. We're a good area. We've got a good labor force here. They pay good wages. I was making over $16 an hour there. And that's non-union, plus benefits. Plus good insurance, a liberal vacation plan, the whole nine, incentives, work incentives, safety bonuses, all this kind of stuff. So the idea that businesses do not reinvest in their employees and in their businesses to expand and create more business or take more of the market share from somebody else is just nonsense, as Robert B. Reich would say. And yes, and I ask my son this, I ask anybody else this that talks about these absorbent wages for these CEOs of these companies, and I ask them one simple question: can you run that company? And can you run that company and make it profitable? Can you? I've yet to get an answer back. I've yet to get an answer back anybody I've ever asked that to. Because I never think about that. I know I couldn't. And there's only so many people that can out there that actually have that type of personality, the drive, the expertise, the education, the knowledge, the experience they build up over the years to actually take the helm of a company, a multi-million-dollar company, and either take it over, make it profitable, or continue to make it more profitable, or at least keep it, earning profits, as it were. It's just like, why do football players, NFL, NBA, National Baseball, hockey, why do they get paid these exorbitant amounts to play? Because at their level, there's only so many athletes at that level. And they garner that wage. That's what the market will bear. That's what the market will bear. And for somebody to come along and arbitrarily say, well, they're not worth that much, who are you? And again, can you do what they do? And in the corporate world, and I'm going to just stick with America, there are CEOs all the time that are fired, that don't get the job done. I've known a couple of them. They couldn't do it. And so they either got fired or they stepped down. They resigned and said, well, I can't do it, and I'm just going to save you the trouble. And so, again, I'd like to see some of these anti-freedom folks out there run a company. I'd like to see the type of company they'd run. I'd like to see Robert B. Reich run a company or corporation that he's running down. He couldn't do it, folks. He absolutely couldn't do it. Remember that? I don't remember his name. It just popped in my head. He owned that check cashing business. So he decided that he was going to be magnanimous to his employees, and everybody was going to make $75,000 a year. His business only lasted a year. And it went belly up. Why? Because he was paying more than the company could afford for these employees, and other companies were paying less, and the formula just didn't work. You cannot take socialistic, Marxist, communist ideas and run a company and make it profitable. I mean, Russia tried that. China tried that years ago. Didn't work. China had this little thing called Hong Kong that the British eventually turned over to them. And Hong Kong actually had a GDP greater than the whole of China at one time. Why? Free market capitalism, folks. Free market capitalism. And again, these folks, they have no clue about free market capitalism because they don't want to know. All they know, all they were ever taught was free market capitalism is wrong, it's bad, you put whatever you want, adjective you want in there to describe it, and that's their mindset, and that's what their narrative is, and so they have to build that narrative and use whatever facts, cherry-picked or not, to support that narrative. And again, I'm not an economist. I do study economics, Austrian economics, and it didn't take me long to refute all those. And like I said, I have articles in here. I have the histories on the side of tax cuts. Trump's tax plan is brilliant, politics, and even better, economics. The moral defense of tax havens. A 15% tax on freelance incomes would be huge. Thank goodness for tax havens. And what ended the Great Depression? You know, that goes back to his earlier point. What point was that? About loopholes? Point number 3, where he says it'll hurt the economy. What got us out of the Depression? Well, one, it wasn't World War II, because we didn't come back up to the stock market levels, if you want to use that as an indicator, until 1954 or through 56, somewhere in there. So it wasn't the government. And what it was the tax reduction on everything, dropping the taxes down to spur investment. And all these corporations were investing and hiring folks to make themselves more profitable. Oh, say it isn't so, Bob. You told me just the opposite. They don't do that. All they do is pay all this money to their CEOs and pay their employees nothing. The way he talks, the employees work there for free because they just enjoy working there for nothing. You know, and that's the mindset of these folks. And that's what I wanted to get out to you today. All right, enough of that. I spent 2 days on that. It's probably longer than I needed to. I just wanted to clean up the video for today and go over some of them points again. The DACA. I cannot believe I can't believe the ignorance of some folks, the willful ignorance about our laws, about how executive orders work, that they're not supposed to be legislative because Article 1 of the Constitution invests all legislative powers in a Congress. There's nothing in Article 2 about the presidency that gives him the authority, him or her, the authority to legislate with a pen and a phone. And basically what's happened, and I have this article in here, The Right Way to Save DACA. It's a program of trying to find the deferred action of childhood arrivals. Okay, basically what it was illegal immigrants came over to the United States with children, or they came over here and had children here, and this is keeping them from getting deported. And what happened under the Obama administration was that the Congress didn't pass anything on this. So since Congress didn't act on this to protect these kids, then the president with his phone or his ink pen signed an executive order creating what they call the DREAM Act, okay, for these dreamers. Well, basically what President Donald Trump has done was he's rescinded the unconstitutional executive order creating DACA in the first place and putting the onus back on Congress, saying, folks, guys, gals, this is on your plate. This never should have got to the president. This should have never been anything we exercised at all because you guys didn't pass it to begin with. Now, I've watched all sorts of things on social media that, you know, the sky, you know, the Chicken Little's running around, the sky is falling, the sky is falling. President Trump talked about a 6-month wind down period, and then they went into a 24-month to give Congress a chance to fix this. Now, I don't blame the kids. I really don't blame the kids, and I don't want to sound hard-hearted here or anything like this. But if the kids are under a certain age or over a certain age and they've been here, in my opinion, and maybe I'm wrong, and you can correct me on this, give the kids, not the parents, give the kids a path to citizenship. Somehow, some way. I don't know how it is. Let my representatives hash it out in Congress. The parents, if they're here illegally, they need to go back. And I've been taking the task by my antagonists on Facebook for saying this before. They're illegally here. Well, people say, well, there's no harm. Well, what about all the fraud that they committed to be here, to get their children into school, get their children a driver's license, get them into college, and get them jobs? You have I-9 forms. That's immigration status or citizenship status, I-9 forms. I had to sign them when I was a truck driver. Prove that I was an American citizen. The kids are not American citizens. Whether they were born in Mexico or born here to two illegal immigrants, they're not American citizens. And so for them to get a Social Security number so they could get into school, so they could get a driver's license, so they could get into college, so they can get a job and do all these other things, they had to commit fraud on the I-9 form. They had to commit fraud with Social Security numbers. How many of these illegal immigrant parents have Social Security numbers? You can't get a job without a Social Security number. So There's a way to do this. There is a right way to do this. It has to be through Congress. It has to be through Congress, not through the president. And I'm hoping that the president continues to go through these executive orders and goes back a little bit further, talking about an executive order to stop offshore drilling on the continental U.S. and an executive order to ban the building of new oil refineries. He needs to go back and get rid of those. Congress did not pass laws banning that as executive orders. And again, I think Congress in a couple of these situations were being gutless, to put a fine point on it. But I think there has to be a little bit of compassion with this, because in my opinion, the kids weren't at fault. I know I've seen a lot of arguments either way. Okay, I've seen a lot of arguments. One, Kevin Gutzman, I follow him on Facebook. He's a public figure. He said if my parents stole $1 million when I was, a couple years old, and we're living high on the hog on that $1 million, and they embezzled it, let's say, and they get caught, and I'm used to a certain level of living, certain style of living, they get caught and either go to jail or they get community service and house arrest, and they got to give back all that money and get jobs that aren't commensurate or can't support me in this lifestyle I'm accustomed to, then I have to go back down to this other lifestyle. And he makes a good point. And a lot of these dreamers, from what I've been reading, these folks that fall under this DACA do have relatives in Mexico. They do speak the language. They do speak Spanish. And if they had to go back, it wouldn't be a huge burden for them, other than that they grew up here. But that would be a cautionary tale, one, for parents trying to bring kids over here illegally, and two, for the kids that are trying to stay here. Go back and do it right, because there's kids coming from other parts of the world that families are trying to get in here from other parts of the world that are doing it legally, and they can't get in because of quotas and stuff like that. And you just waltz across the border, or your parents just bring you across the border, and that's supposed to give you special privileges. And even though you grew up here all your life, it's a balancing act, folks. I have compassion for these kids, but I still think there has to be some type of ramifications, whether it's to the adults or the kids or both. And that would be a cautionary tale for other folks doing the same thing. Just a couple other things that are in the show notes page. I thought this was dumb. This comment here by Jesse Jackson: Trump would not qualify to get into Jesus' kingdom. As if, and this is by Paul Cookstrun. He posted it September 1st of this year at the Free Beacon, the Washington Free Beacon. And I was just thinking, who is Jesse Jackson? I've listened to his religious speeches and stuff like that. Who's Jesse Jackson to say Donald Trump is not qualified to get into Christ's kingdom or Jesus' kingdom? Only God's the one that determines that. Now, we know that if you're not following the right things, that you're not going to get into heaven. You're not following God's word and doing things God's way, you're not going to get into heaven. So, but there's a couple other things on the show notes page. Folks, that's the music. That's the end of the show. Fear not, I'll be back with you tomorrow at noon. This has been the Dan Clements Show. I'm your host, Dan Clements. Remember, if you aim at nothing, you hit it every time. Have a great rest of the day, and God bless.